Welcome back to Variant Quran. I'm Dr. Daniel Brubaker. Today is a day just for answering some of your questions from previous videos. So if you want to see if your question got answered or hear what others have asked and how I respond, hang around, and we'll be doing that over the next few minutes. Well, thank you very much for being with me on this channel for this time. We're approaching 6 months since I started doing this, and we are also approaching 16,000 subscribers to the channel. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so. It's great to have the opportunity to connect with you on a regular basis, and I do appreciate each one of you who has subscribed on here and who is watching these videos. I take gratification in knowing that the things that I'm talking about are connecting with people not just near me, and not just in my circle of friends, acquaintances, or colleagues in academia, but in many places around the world. So whatever benefit this is to you, I'm glad that it is a benefit to you, and thank you very much for watching. Well, let's get right into it. Today I am going to be answering a few questions, and the first question here is, I don't believe you until we test the ink that we used and see how old it is. And that was from the video talking about the Allah insertions in a number of early Quran manuscripts. The question of the dating of ink is something that comes up frequently, and I may have addressed it briefly in the past, but the problem with testing the manuscript page is that the parchment can sit around for a while before it gets written. Now, we don't always assume that it would have sat around for a long time before it got written on, but you have to keep that as a possibility, whereas ink doesn't sit around for a long time before it gets put on the page. Yeah, I've hoped for the possibility to test ink many times myself, and there are people who are looking into whether this can become more viable. It would be possible, in fact, to test some inks, namely those inks that are that contain organic material, and anything that was once alive is organic. And so it would be possible to test organic inks for their age. The only problem is that in order to do radiocarbon dating, you need a sufficient amount of material to do it, and the test is destructive, meaning you would need to have lots of ink or a sufficient amount of ink that would destroy a lot of the manuscript in order to get the ink for it, which just is not a viable thing. Nobody's going to scrape off the ink of an entire manuscript just to find out how old it is, because then you don't have the manuscript writing anymore. That is the problem with dating ink. All of us would love to be able to have a way to date ink to see when closer to the time that the manuscript was written. But I will point out that the same problem that we have when it comes to dating the page of the manuscript would exist when it came to the ink, but to a lesser degree, and probably a significantly lesser degree. And that is, the dating of parchment obviously presumes that, and because the radiocarbon date gives a probability range of when the animal was alive, that the parchment was made from, and there's always the possibility that pages sat for a time, perhaps an extended time, perhaps even centuries before it was written. And so you don't know for certain that the radiocarbon date gives you an indication of when the manuscript was written. Now, you know that the manuscript was not written before the animal died, so that does give you that part of the date range, that end of the date range. So yeah, that just answers that question about ink. I too would like to know how old it is, but until we can only work with the tools that we have, and we don't have that tool right now. All right, here's the second question. It comes from Robert W. It says, what I would like to see, perhaps in a future video, is some consideration of the theological implications, if any, of these variants. Would that be possible? And that question was related to the video in which I presented to you a frequently corrected word in early Quran manuscripts, and that was the word deriving from the root ra, zay, kaf, and that would be a very obviously important thing to do, is to talk about the theological implications of these variants. And not only with these variants, but with the other variants that I talk about. I would have to go back and look at that video to remind myself of what I did cover in it, but obviously the word rizq relates to Allah's providence, his provision for people's needs, and that is something that does have that is a theological matter. How Allah provides for people and the manner and means in which he does so and so forth. So there's not much more really to say there, except I acknowledge the importance of talking about theological implications of these variants, because that's quite possibly one of the motivating factors if we are looking at something other than mere scribal correction of a mistake. All right, here's the third one. This is from the very first video that I did, which now just went over 40,000 views. So thank you for watching that video and sharing it with people. This Abdurrahman says, stop putting words in his mouth. Human error is found in everything, especially when people are writing it by hand. That's why you see the corrections. Scripture error are not found in all the Quran that were written in the same time. There are plenty of Quran that don't have those mistakes and were written on the same time or earlier. The big assumption that Abdurrahman makes is that all of these corrections are human error. Now, they may be human error, they may not be human error, we don't know. And we have to consider the possibility of human error, but we have to consider, I think, other possibilities as well. And so the very existence of other Qurans written at the same time or earlier, other Quran manuscripts that align with the standard rasam as we have it today, does not necessarily mean that a variant or a correction that seems to lie outside those things is not significant. It may be significant. It may represent a point in time at which a scribe or a corrector saw something in the manuscript or felt something to be correct that was at variance with what we have. All right, let's move on to the next one here. This is Seth Suleiman, and his comment is, number one, Quran means recite, and it is revealed through recitation. And so number two, this commenter says, on a piecemeal basis over 23 years, Angel Gabriel recited to Prophet Muhammad, who memorized it and recited to the many known companions who memorized, recited, and practiced its message. It was preserved for 23 years through memorization, recitation, and acting upon its teaching by thousands of known companions, though many of them wrote piecemeal over that 23 years. Its preservation is totally unlike the Bible and other scriptures, though its interpretation was and is still ongoing to answer ever ongoing issues. So I hear this observation, I hear these comments, and what Mr. Suleiman has expressed is the traditional account of how the Quran was delivered, initially written down, preserved and passed along during the time of Muhammad's life and afterwards. And yeah, there's no question that that is the traditional account. So what I'm doing when we're looking at the manuscripts is to weigh the traditional account, which was not written down, by the way, until sometime after the events that they describe, and to look at the manuscripts and see if they can align with that or if they give us more information. And the manuscripts do, in fact, give more information, and what we're trying to do is square that and think about that as a good historian. All right, here's the next comment. It's from Bigger Bond. And this commenter is talking about the interview with Dr. Asma Hilali. This commenter says, so first she states that these are school texts, that is, presumably written by students who are learning the Quran. Then she states that the variations are not variations but variants. And finally, the variations are glosses. This commenter says, I don't believe a word. If there are variations between the subtext and the supertext, then this cannot be explained to be some kind of comment or explanation. It shows an evolution of the text. Well, I will just comment on this, that I do think that there's a lot to be discussed around this. I don't personally feel completely compelled by the explanation of the school text, of it being a school text, but I think it needs to be considered as a possibility. I think the things that speak against it being a school text are, number one, the expense of the material. It does not seem like the sort of thing that would be used in a school exercise. Here's the last question that I want to talk about today. It's from Mohsin al-Haq. If this man knew about ahruf and kira'at, A little knowledge is dangerous. People here also like, yeah, Quran has errors. I am laughing at their ignorance. Read something about 7 ahruf and 10 qira'at of Quran. You will find all answers of it. And so I don't know that this comment needs an answer necessarily from me, except I will just turn the question back on the commenter and say that, as I put out this information, and this question was on one of my earlier videos where I showed multiple instances of correction and variation on a single page. And, obviously I'm sharing and describing the things that I've found. And if you find an explanation for these things in the literature of the Qira'at and Ahruf, then please leave the mention of those in the comment section. My suggestion has been that most of the things that I'm presenting to you, I have not found in those literatures. In other words, they exceed the bounds of what is mentioned. And that was the case with my doctoral dissertation. Now, maybe there are sources that I'm not familiar with, or other things that I haven't taken into consideration. But certainly, if this is open to the world, and so if you find variations that are accepted in the Ahruf or the Qira'at, then please post them here on any of my videos that make reference and describe corrections or variations. And so that's it. That's all I really want to talk about today. Wherever you are in the world, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon.